Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the conference. My name is Ken Eman. I'm a partner at Wyrick Robbins, located in Raleigh, North Carolina, and the leader of our firm's life sciences practice group. We are a full-service law firm focused on growth-oriented businesses. We've been supporting the Southeast life science community since its earliest days and are pleased to be a sponsor of this first combined organization conference and are particularly pleased to be sponsoring this timely and important panel discussion. I would like to introduce Tiffany Jordan Whitlow, the co-founder and chief development officer of Aclinate. She's an innovator and entrepreneur with 10 years of business management expertise. She's experienced in all aspects of business formation, operations, strategic messaging, and marketing, and we're happy to have her moderate our panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ken. As Ken mentioned, it is such a pleasure to be here with you today. Aclinate is a trusted digital health company in integrating culture and technology to educate and engage diverse individuals. And what a timely conversation this panel's have today. Thank you so much for joining today's panel discussion. They've definitely saved the best for last. I don't know what my panelists think, but I believe they saved the best for last. On behalf of the panel, I want to thank all of our attendees today. I hope you motivated to be included and to be involved. We vow to keep it real and we look forward to your engagement. So don't forget the chat feature. I want to begin with each of our panelists taking 30 seconds or so to introduce yourselves, please. Garen, we're going to start with you.
Yeah, thank you, Tiffany, and good morning, everybody. Garen Wilson, I'm Senior Director of Inclusion Strategy and Partnering at Genentech. Pleasure to be joining Dr. Clark and Tiffany in this morning's discussion. I've been at Genentech for about 10 years, had a variety of roles spanning our commercial business practices, managed care, strategy, marketing, government affairs, kind of corporate strategy. So I've covered the gamut here and look forward to sharing some of the things that I've learned around the way and how diversity and inclusion and equity are becoming more central to our enterprise and our activity. So thanks for inviting me.
Dr. Clark.
Good morning, everyone. This is Dr. Luther Clark, and it's a real pleasure to be with you today. I am currently the Deputy Chief Patient Officer at Merck. My background is cardiology. I was in clinical and academic cardiology for most of my career. I've been at Merck now for about 13 years, and I'm in a part of the organization that focuses on bringing patient insights into our decision-making and also increasing diversity in our clinical research. So it's a pleasure to be with you today, and I look forward to the discussion.
The lovely Dr. Morgan.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Jane Morgan, and I am also a cardiologist by training. My background comes in through patient management, but also through industry, working for several years in R&D and medical affairs at both Solvay and Abbott. Currently, I'm at Piedmont and been in a variety of roles, leading their cardiovascular research program, and then strategy for research across the system onto their innovation and intellectual property opportunities. And now am leading the COVID task force. One of my focuses has been on increased minority recruitment into clinical trials.
Awesome, thank you. Dr. Felix?
Yes, thank you for inviting me to this panel. I'm Felix Agade. I practice here in Macon, Georgia. I'm part of a health system called Navicent Health and recently Atrium Health. In Georgia, I've practiced here for over 20 years. I'm a cardiologist and clinical electrophysiologist. And we've participated in a wide array of clinical studies over the last 20+ years that have led to various guidelines and other decision processes. Our focus expands across all the spectrum of cardiovascular diseases, though our main area of specialization is arrhythmia-related conditions, but we're heavily involved in heart failure studies and also prevention studies. And I've served as the head of the Arrhythmia Services Program here, and also recently I was the chairman of the Association of Black Cardiologists Board of Directors, and I'm glad to be part of this panel today. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you all. I hope that our attendees can see the wonderful experience that we share here on this panel, and I'm going to go ahead and jump right in. The 40-year Tuskegee study of untreated syphilis in the African American male study was a major violation of ethical standards. Researchers knowingly failed to treat patients appropriately after penicillin was proven to be an effective treatment for syphilis and became widely available. James H. Jones, a historian and specialist in bioethical issues, wrote, "As a symbol of racism, the Tuskegee study may never move the nation to action, but it can change the way Americans view illness. For the sake of claiming diverse involvement, history has created a reputation that precedes itself when it comes to clinical trials. So as we migrate to present-day issues, the lack of diverse presence has resulted in misguided medication administration and less than optimal health outcomes." The first question is for each of the panelists. Let's fast forward 40 years. In your professional opinion, what has industry learned from this Tuskegee trial? Dr. Morgan, we'll start with you.
So a couple of things, the Tuskegee trial is certainly one of the more famous ones that people, I think, refer to, and it's actually the topic of this panel. But certainly we've had so many atrocities committed against us. I think when we look at Dr. James Sims, who's known as the father of gynecology, and all of the atrocities he committed against Black women, creating surgeries to repair fistulas, which are connections really between either the vagina and the ureter, or the vagina and the rectum. Those women underwent multiple surgeries without anesthesia, screaming and writhing in pain. They had no choice over their bodies. Eventually, he perfected that technique after hundreds of surgeries were done on Black women without anesthesia. He then went on to perform those surgeries on white women very successfully with anesthesia. It was such a successful surgery that he became known as the father of gynecology, and we have a statue erected of him in New York. We finally had that statue taken down in 2018 because we protested the atrocities and the heinous acts against humanity and the number of Black women who suffered, who had no choice to undergo all of those multiple surgeries without anesthesia, the cruelty of that. And so when we talk about the Tuskegee Experiment, it encompasses many heinous acts over time. And so we can understand why there's reluctance for Black people to participate in clinical trials. Where are we today? Certainly we are in a better place. We have the FDA, and so we do have some regulation over how these trials are performed. With regard to pharmaceutical and device companies, however, it's still somewhat business as usual, meaning that we still don't have the attraction of minorities into these clinical trials. We still don't have minorities as principal investigators. We still don't have minorities in roles of clinical leadership in medical institutions and academic institutions, on study sites. And so we start to have, sort of this continued distancing of Blacks and minorities from trials. And what we really are saying in 2020, going into 2021, is that there's a lack of access, and that really equates to a difference in health equity between what Black people are receiving, Black patients are receiving versus others.
Yes. You led into a few of my other questions. So yes, you are so right. Thank you so much. Dr. Clark?
Sure. Just to add to Dr. Morgan's comments, the Tuskegee syphilis study, as we all know, is often referred to as a reason that Blacks and other people of color mistrust research, and why few participate in research, and also why there's distrust and often avoidance of medical care. But I think we all recognize that unethical research practices on African American men and women in the US dates back far longer than the Tuskegee study, even into the 18th century and throughout most of the 20th century. But the Tuskegee study itself and the legacy continues, has become a symbol for all the composite of abuses that have occurred over time. And I would say is arguably the most infamous biomedical research study in US history, and also a major scar for US medicine, and certainly for the Public Health Service that conducted that study. But as Dr. Morgan mentioned, a number of safeguards have been put in place to prevent many of the abuses that occurred in Tuskegee and other studies. But that legacy persists. And I think as we speak to this era of COVID-19 and the pandemic that is facing us, the concern, the mistrust in the research that's being done, and also the lack of confidence that is being shown already about the potential vaccines that would be available is still there. So there is concern that these issues continue to exist. The mistrust certainly continues to be there. And I think addressing it requires not only communicating through trusted voices, but also the construct of that message. So I would say one of the main things about Tuskegee, in addition to the horrific example that it sets for medical research, is the enduring legacy and the fact that it is symbolic for this broader issue of mistrust in our community. And while progress has been made since those days, a lot more work continues to need to be done.
Yeah, I'll actually kind of jump in on this. I appreciate the historical context that Dr. Morgan and Dr. Clark are providing. I agree entirely with the comments that have been made. The mistrust is certainly there. I think the Tuskegee experiment is emblematic of a lot of what has been wrong. But I think, because of the legacy of that experiment and the impression that's left within our community, I think it's upon industry, and I use industry in its broadest sense, collective industry, but certainly, the space that I represent, which is, biotech and biopharmaceutical manufacturers. I think we have to invest at a scale to really change that perception. And that's really putting money into kind of our research infrastructure, prioritizing inclusive research, and, the importance of all communities to be a participant in the research environment, just for access to high quality care, but for, just access to the best that the future has to offer. So I think it requires a level of scale and a level of kind of organizational commitment to invest to change and disrupt these perceptions that persist. Because what we found is, yes, there is deep mistrust. We at Genentech recently fielded a health equity study and found that patients were in some ways feel like the whole medical system is weaponized against them, and that they are, avoiding getting, routine procedures like vaccinations and, routine care from their physicians, let alone considering clinical research. So I think there's, some systemic issues that need to change. And I think it's going to require us prioritizing this differently and putting real money, real resources, hiring, people that come from the communities that we want to tap into, so that we can start to build these bridges of trust, and just realize that this is something that takes time. And as long as, we're still talking about Tuskegee now, years and years after it's concluded, to the points that Dr. Morgan and Dr. Clark made, there's been plenty of safeguards that have been put in place. The ethical framework around research is sound, it protects patients, and yet these perceptions still exist. So I think we have to acknowledge that we're going to have to be in this for the long haul, go to the churches, go to the, the barbershops and the beauty salons and the places we haven't typically focused on as a industry, biopharmaceutical industry, with the resources to do this at scale. We got to do it and not shy away from it, and be committed to do it going forward.
Awesome. Thank you. Dr. Felix?
Yes, thank you. I think I echo all the other comments said so far. I think my own reflection is that when you look at a lot of these clinical studies and maybe clinical medicine in general, when you look at a lot of the landmark trials, whether it's the more recent studies on heart failure, the proportion of African Americans involved in participating in these studies always reflect the percentage of African Americans in general in clinical medicine. Like, for example, in cardiology, the estimate is that it's probably about 3 to 4% Blacks are in clinical cardiology. And you will notice that a lot of the big cardiology trials will have probably 3 to 4% African American participation. Some of the higher participation rates are seen maybe up to 5%. And I think this reflects what has happened maybe over the course, maybe perhaps even before the Tuskegee Experiment. Over the last 100 years, the growth rate of African American participation in clinical medicine is about 1% growth over a 100 years time period. And I think so we have to look at it in multiple strategic directions in terms of workforce development, and also in the design of a lot of these studies. The studies are already conceptualized and designed before it's presented to our community to start enrolling patients. I think unless there is some presence at the table, meaningful presence, and not just people that will, echo, and not be able to kind of speak up, people who are truly engaged in the communities to be able to say, well, if you are going to design this study in this fashion and you want to attract a certain segment of the population, you have to introduce these concepts into your design approach so that then you could be able to attract a wider array of participants in the study. And also there is a question of geographic and ethnic disparity. Population tends to live in certain geographic segments. You have to kind of fine tune if you're going to enroll, what is the concept of distance. And I think what COVID has shown us now is that we can actually do a lot of things effectively through remote consenting and remote, follow-up and stuff. So a lot of this evolution will probably help us in moving the needle in a more positive direction.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, everybody. You guys kind of alluded to this, but today clinical trial participant rights are protected by law and by ethics committees, such as the IRB, the Institutional Review Board, which are independent from the people actually conducting the study. So IRBs carefully review plans for the research involving people, and obviously there's a review that is done while that research is being done. Most people don't understand that there are these protections in place. So what do you believe can be done to better educate the community at these things that are now in place in order to protect them? Dr. Morgan.
When we look at the percentage of African American in this country, 80% are seen and managed by African American physicians. Why is that? Why do African American physicians manage 80% of the health care of our population? The reason for that is safety. We choose first to seek our health care where we feel that we can be safe, where we feel that our lives will be valued, where we can understand that no intentional harm will come to us. Almost no other group selects healthcare based on safety. And so we have to start there. Our physicians that we see and whom we develop relationships with and who are in our community hold a lot of power. That is the trust relationship. And if those physicians approach patients with clinical trials to enroll in clinical trials, the likelihood of those patients enrolling in clinical trials is very high. What we have is a distance of our health professionals and academic centers and medical centers. There's generally not a relationship between Black physicians and academic centers. So there's that gap there. And therefore, there's not that much interest in it based on a lot of historical concepts. And so we've got these deviations from the norm, from the median. And that's where we really have to start. We have to begin with those relationships. We have to begin with trust. We have to begin with training Black physicians as principal investigators, because they control and contain 80% of patients. And this is how patients will begin to be enrolled in trials. We have to begin to develop medicines and devices that are relevant for the entire population. We have multiple instances of drugs, certainly cardiology drugs, that have FDA approval. And then once we are prescribing them in our practices, then we note that there are other side effects that are happening, and we are reporting what we call post-market, after the drug has been approved. This is a common practice, not only throughout the United States, but throughout the world. And we cannot allow medicine to continue to be practiced in this way. We have to have our patients step up, enroll in clinical trials with which we feel comfortable. We have read the protocols. We are presenting these trials to our patients such that we can develop medications, devices, and vaccines that are relevant to our populations and that we can be included and that are reflective of the multicultural populations here in the United States.
Yeah, I love it. I know that I didn't really send you guys the questions ahead of time. I think you, for some reason, did see the questions ahead of time, because that's leading right into my next question. And Dr. Felix, I'm going to kind of...
I haven't seen any questions.
Dr. Felix, I'm going to kind of turn this to you. So leading into this, the original question was, what do you think could be done to just generally educate the public on the IRB process and make sure that we first understand that there is something in place to make things different today than they were during that Tuskegee trial? That's all.
Yeah, I think with the IRB process, a lot of the institutions, a lot of IRBs are based in academic institutions. Like I mentioned before, I think Dr. Morgan just highlighted that there is the question of geographic disparity as well, whereby the population that we want to enroll are kind of removed from a lot of these institutions. I know for a lot of the studies that are done in the community, we may use central IRBs. But still, even despite all that, people are still hesitant to participate in some of the studies, despite all the assurances, because you have to remember that it's a significant amount. The Tuskegee Experiment violated one of the most fundamental trusts that can exist between the physician and the patient, which is to mislead and to hide, therapy that can be potentially life-saving. So I think one of the impact that would be important is to actually increase the number of participants, whether they are clinical trial coordinators, whether they are people involved in the administration of the study, train a lot of more African-American participants to participate as clinical trial coordinators, people being involved in the research and administrative, so that that presence is not the entire answer, but at least it helps to allay. And people can say, well, I see someone that looks like me, and maybe they may feel there may be some comfort level that comes from that. That's not the totality of it, but I think it helps a long way, because then you are involving people that live in the communities, workers, health workers will help to kind of educate. We've used a lot of the churches and other avenues to disseminate health information in the past. And we also have to understand, how do people consume their health information? What are the sources? And we'll probably have to also do a lot of awareness campaign, and people from the community should be involved in these IRBs, though it's designed to be, but we realize in actual fact it's not.
Yeah, thank you so much. Mr. Wilson or Dr. Clark, did you guys have anything to add to that?
Sure. A couple of things, and I would just amplify some of the comments that have already been made. I think as Dr. Morgan suggested, if a patient's own doctor recommends a clinical trial to them, they're likely to say yes, because they believe and they trust that doctor and that information, that referral is coming from a trusted voice. The fact that there are safeguards, the fact that many of these are included in the informed consent, and there's IRB oversight, is important and reassuring, but that still needs to be communicated to the patients through a trusted voice, because and there are a lot of details there, and the patient will be looking to their medical provider or professional to have reviewed, to understand it, and to be making a recommendation to them in their best interest. And while there is a significant amount of altruism, patients are often interested in their own care, what's best for them, and what's best for their families in their communities, and they would like to know that these things are being considered. But there are a couple of other points, and I think Dr. Felix Agade alluded to them. If you need the information communicated through trusted voices, then those trusted voices have to be there, and there's a very small number of investigators of color. So we do need to increase the workforce there, not only the investigators themselves, but the team that will be interacting with the patient or the participant. The other thing that he mentioned that I think is really important, and that does not often get thought about very much, is that when these trials are designed, they're often not designed with communities of color in mind. So sometimes well-intentioned oversights are not considering some of those aspects that are really important, or that may be significant barriers to participants in communities of color just aren't thought about. So thinking about it earlier on in terms of how the study is designed, really working with voices and investigators and sites that the patient can identify with and that they trust, and then in assisting those clinicians who may not be researchers themselves, so that they're comfortable and that they're willing to comfortable and able to share the details and communicate the importance and the value of the research. So there's quite a bit to be done, but I think that the short answer to your question is that the protections and the IRB safeguards are really important, but not sufficient. And that trusted voice is one of the keys that we need to address, and have them be the ones who communicate to the patients why participation is something that they should or should not consider.
Thank you. Dr. Wilson, did you have anything to add to that question?
Yeah, I'd add three things. Number one, I believe that, industry, we sponsor the majority of clinical research that takes place. And so I think there is a certain accountability that industry has to play to make sure that that everything that the panel has said thus far is baked into the protocol and execution of our studies. So making sure that the patient voice is at the table when protocol is being designed. There's a diverse array of patient perspectives that are embedded into that. The IRB certainly is a protection, but there's, that has a degree of limitations, but the premise of it is to protect patient interest. I think part of the informed consent is also that's the exchange to the patient. So having somebody who can translate that informed consent, make it clear what it's, what they're going to get involved with, and do it in a way that talks about the entire research process. Like, it's, in some ways we think about research and people believe that they are guinea pigs. That comes up often. But actually you're getting access to high quality medical care from, top specialists and experts in their respective fields. You're wrapped around with a bunch of supportive services and nursing and staff that are, designed to address a scientific question, but also provide high quality care. So in the cancer care setting, places where my company is heavily invested, getting access to a clinical trial has been shown to improve outcomes. And so I think that's part of the translation, that we need people that come from the community to be able to carry that message to patients, so it gets in their mind deeply. They share it with the rest of the broader family. I think it's really important. I think, my final point on this is just, I think there's a bit of we at Genentech have an advisory council and external council that we work. And I'm going to channel something that Edith Mitchell, many of you may know, she's past president of the NMA, has often said, which is the interaction with primary care can't be understated. We do have to, in a lot of instances, clinical research is done in the specialty care setting, yet the primary care physician is the main doctor that the patient interacts with. And so just, partnership with primary care, recognizing all of the, what they're dealing with and managing broad patient care and across a variety of different disease states, but around the topic of clinical research, involvement, participation, what it is, what it isn't, like kind of giving the primary care community something tangible that they can use to just embed that into their interactions with patients would be helpful as well.
And Garen, if I could just add, I mean, that point that you made in terms of connecting the research to the care, I mean, to the extent that that could be done, I mean, that would be hugely important, particular in areas like oncology, but not only oncology. So that would be something that would be extremely helpful.
Yeah, and one of the questions that we have here in the chat is, do we have diverse representation at the IRB level? Does anyone want to take on that question?
No. Next question.
All right, thank you, Dr. Morgan. So to follow up with what Dr. Clark was alluding to, one of the things that we saw as an opportunity to really touch base with the boots on the ground and be a connector for UAB, the University of Alabama here in Birmingham, and their local community that is actually a majority minority, was kind of go through a storytelling evaluation. So I needed people to understand that this medication you've trusted for a really long time was actually developed here with these local partners. And so as you think about the thought process of taking this phenomenal work that Dr. Morgan and Dr. Clark and Dr. Wilson and Dr. Felix have done for all these years, how are we really going to make sure that the community understands that there's people who look just like them on the other side of the table making these decisions? Is there a communication process or something that's being streamlined from industry, from the top down?
Yeah,
Anyone?
maybe I can take the first crack at this. So the quick answer is yes, it's coming. So one of the silver linings, I'm not going to call it silver lining, just one of the manifestations of the pandemic this year and a lot of the social unrest is that industry everybody is aware of injustice in all these forms, healthcare injustice and policing, et cetera. So it brought industry together in a new way. So oftentimes, we're competitive companies. Everybody's making their own degree of significant investments, building up capabilities. I think all of us on this panel have been at this for some time, pushing and fighting the good fight to make change here. But this year, almost poured like gasoline on the burning platform. So, industry has come together and there's been these kind of steering council meetings. Industry's been meeting within the pharma setting over the past year throughout the summer and have come up with a racial justice plan that I think is quite compelling. I mean, if you think about this industry, it's a large industry. There's a lot of resource in this industry. And if we can combine our efforts and partner with our trade association to help catalyze respective things that each individual companies are doing, I think it could be powerful. And so one thing that is coming forward is just new economic opportunity for, diverse owned businesses, suppliers that are, people of color owned, women owned, folks that could be running contract research organizations or, kind of organizations that have a community footprint that's significant. There's a lot of intense focus there. There's going to be an industry point of view on clinical trial diversity that's already up on the pharma.org/equity webpage, which is communicating pharma's approach. And all of our respective companies are going to double down on our commitment, trying to think about our workforce and, significantly increasing representation of communities of color that can work in our scientific enterprise and help shape our scientific agenda and our aspirations there. Work in our outreach organization and just communicate this message. So I think there's there's a new priority that I think our industry as a whole has around some of these issues. I would say the folks on this panel have already prioritized this, and we're already deeply invested and are going to continue to do things. You mentioned University of Alabama, Birmingham. We are developing an alliance where we're making investments at research sites, specifically with the intention of trying to increase inclusive research and partnering with the experts that have demonstrated that they can do it well, and making sure that they have access to our clinical trials, that we benefit from all the rich learnings that they have in community outreach and engagement, and giving them resources to do their work and expand. So those types of programs will, in my estimation, proliferate as more of industry starts to adopt these similar practices.
Clinical trials offer our best and brightest thinking. Just think about that. The absolute best in science and medicine comes through clinical trials. I posit often when I'm giving talks about this, that if you're not offered a clinical trial during the course of your interaction with your physician, you are being treated optimally, meaning you are being treated to the absolute top of evidence-based medicine and medical guidelines, but you are not being treated maximally. And 2 or 3 weeks ago, when the President of the United States became infected with COVID, he illustrated my point better than I've ever been able to do so. He went to Walter Reed, received Regeneron's cocktail of monoclonal antibodies, began dexamethasone, received remdesivir. People for the first time heard terms like emergency use authorization by the FDA. These are what we're talking about in clinical trials. He received platinum healthcare that is only available, that you can only access via clinical trials. The African American community and other BIPOC, Black, Indigenous populations, and people of color, our mouths were agape. They had never seen healthcare to that level. And that's what we're talking about with clinical trials. We cannot afford to be excluded any longer based on historical context. Not that it's not real, but we will be left behind in our health equity, in our search for health justice, and in our healing, both mentally and physically. And so that is a great example of what clinical trials can offer you. What they offer you is access to tomorrow's therapies today. And this is how we have to begin to contextualize that within our communities.
Yeah, that's a great example. I actually hadn't thought about that in that context. But if you look at the comments that Dr. Wilson made, and in terms of the spotlight that has been placed on the importance of communities that are impacted to participate in the research that leads to the development of new therapies. I mean, advancing the science, developing new therapies, and also improving outcomes, as well as the social justice movement, so that we're at a point in time where there may be the opportunity to make a real difference, because I think we all recognize these aren't new issues, but at this moment in time, perhaps we can do some things that will make a difference. And going from, the spotlight that has been put on disparities, but also the importance of communities that are impacted to be a part of the research and developing the solution, to this example of the president who, when he became sick, went into the hospital, got every experimental therapy that was available at that time, and did well. I think it's a great example of the connectivity. So I will use that example if you don't mind.
That was so well stated. Dr. Felix, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think my own main comment, one, I think definitely we know it's also in the economic interest of industry to have participants from the minority community, which is becoming a bigger and bigger proportion of the population in the United States. But a couple of points is that when investigators or clinical researchers participate in clinical trials or clinical studies in general, it allows you to gain early access to evolving therapies, kind of almost early education to know what are the pros and cons and the advantages and disadvantages of such emerging therapy. And by having participants in the minority community involved, the dissipation of such knowledge or such therapies, you already have like a head start in a way in terms of these therapies. But because if you participate in clinical trials, you probably are involved in the community already. They know a little bit about the therapies before they become maybe even to the level before it gets FDA approval. People have kind of heard of such therapy. So it allows early dissipation of such emerging or new therapies. And also it helps the clinicians that I think for us, we also believe that you are not just a consumer of medical knowledge, you are actually contributing to development of new knowledge in medicine. And the other aspect is that I look at one of the biggest studies, a worldwide study on atrial fibrillation called Cabana. And it's had a lot of press. But what is missing in that is that one of the groups that benefited the most from catheter ablation for atrial fibrillation were African Americans. But when you look at the centers, our center here in Macon, Georgia, probably put about a third of the African Americans in this worldwide study in that clinical trial. So I think by having a larger participation, there may be some therapies that may be more beneficial or may not be beneficial, but it's through bigger and bigger studies that we can really sort out, the differences of how different populations may respond to these therapies. And I think it's important to continually push this issue. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This raging pandemic caught the nation unprepared. We have a political system that seems to reward division over unity. If everyone turns on their news station, you're sure to see something about COVID-19. President Donald Trump has established an effort to speed up coronavirus vaccine development in the United States. That is called Operation Warp Speed, which has the goal of providing at least 300 million doses by January 2021. Meanwhile, Merck CEO Kenneth Frazier has emphasized the need for patience and strict adherence to specific principles in the global push to develop a vaccine in order to prevent the coronavirus. Ken says, I know there are a lot of public voices talking about this vaccine and when it will be ready, but the fact of the matter is we cannot rush science. How do you feel about Operation Warp Speed, and what is your organization doing? Are you doing anything with Operation Warp Speed? Obviously, we would like for you to take this first, Dr. Clark.
Great, thank you, I appreciate that. Yes, Ken Frazier, who's the CEO at Merck, is someone that we're all very proud of and look to for tremendous leadership, and certainly recognize him as a leader among leaders, and has been one of the major proponents of health equity moving forward, and not just taking advantage of this opportunity to issue platitudes, but to really do something that is impactful. Having said that, so in historical context, many in our audience may not know. So Merck has been involved in the vaccine business for a long time. And in fact, the record for developing a novel vaccine is held by Merck, and it was 4 years for the measles vaccine. Having said that, of course, no one can wait that long anymore, and certainly not in the middle of a pandemic. So these efforts that have been invested to fast forward the development, and there are clearly some things that can be done that can help make effective therapies available more quickly to patients. For example, one of the barriers that is being addressed by Warp Speed is the ability to upscale manufacturing should an effective vaccine be available. And that has often been one of the delays. The scientific rigor of the studies to demonstrate safety and efficacy cannot be compromised. And I think that's one of the points that not only our CEO, but others have made. And participation of diverse communities, it goes back to comments that several of the panelists have made, but I think Dr. Sagata made it early, probably first, that patients want to know if this works and if it's safe in patients like me. And are there people like me who were involved in the conduct of the study as participants who I trust will be completely straightforward with me. So you're really balancing here, the necessity of speed and the uncertainty of some of these new platforms versus some of the older platforms that have taken much longer. And I think all the indications are that this will be effective. There are a couple of vaccines that are available now. There's some antiviral therapies that should be available soon and will likely be available for patients within the next several months. And then we'll move to the issue of confidence in and willing to take, because the availability of vaccines, of course, does not save lives. It would be the vaccination and patients actually using the therapies that will make a difference. So Merck is really one of the proud participants in this effort to develop vaccines as well as antiviral therapies, and also leadership in terms of promoting the importance that once treatments and vaccines are available,